All right, if you have your Bible this morning, turn to 2 Samuel chapter 22. Now, I don't know how this message will preach. I've never been one to use illustrations. I don't know why it is. I know preachers that they'll use 20 illustrations to prove a point. And I'm wondering how they remembered 20 things to say on just one point. And so I've never been good at illustrations. I like to use Bible illustrations because I can turn to it. And sometimes I use some things that happened in my life. But as far as remembering all these illustrations, I'm pretty terrible at it. But I'm going to do my best this morning. If you're in 2 Samuel chapter 22, we're going to read verse 29 to 31. And the title of the message is, It's Your Turn to Run the Gauntlet. It's your turn to run the gauntlet. Everybody gets their turn. Anyway, 2 Samuel 22, verse 29 to 31. It says, For thou art my lamp, O Lord, and the Lord will lighten my darkness. For by thee I have run through a troop. By my God have I leaped over a wall. As for God, his way is perfect. The word of the Lord is tried. He is a buckler to all them that trust in him. That's that word of prayer. Father, may you bless the message now, Lord. And Father, the very best I could do is inadequate. And I pray, Lord, that you'd help me. I pray that you'd speak to me. I pray, Father, we just get over the point, Lord, that we just don't need to quit. And we need to stand firm and stand strong. And I pray, Father, that this message would be a blessing and encouragement. And thank you for this, and pray that you'll bless it for Jesus' sake. Amen. All right, Hebrews 12:1. I want to read this one to you. It says, Wherefore, seeing we are also are compassed about with so great a cloud of witnesses, let us lay aside every weight and the sin which doth so easily beset us, and let us run with patience the race that is set before us. When we talk about the gauntlet, we're talking about running. It's kind of like a race. You have an incentive to run the race because somebody's beating on you while you're running. And I'm referring to the gauntlets that some of our pioneers and frontiersmen were subjected to by the Indians. And one in particular that I'm going to talk about Simon Kenton. How many of you have ever heard the name Simon Kenton? Okay, a few here. How about Daniel Boone? Anybody heard of Daniel Boone? How about Davy Crockett? How about George Rogers Clark? Some of those names are really popular, but you know, until I had read the book, The Frontiersman, by Alan Eckert, I had never heard of Simon Kenton. And yet he is as famous for opening up this territory to pioneers and to people that were establishing new homes. He was as important in opening that up as Daniel Boone or George Rogers Clark. In fact, he knew both of them personally. We'll talk a little bit about it. He even saved Daniel Boone's life. And I'll tell you a little story how it happened. There was a fort being attacked, and there was a scouting party, and Boone was a part of the scouting party. He was coming back, and Indians were attacking the fort, and Daniel Boone found himself injured. And Simon Kenton, who was a big man, Boone wasn't that big of a man, even though the Bible says the song goes, Daniel Boone was a big man. Well, he wasn't that big. Because Simon Kenton ran out of the fort, picked up Boone, threw him over his shoulder, and was running back. And as he was running back, there was an Indian. Oh my gosh, I said that. There's an Indian standing between him and the fort. And you say, well, what did he do? The only thing he knew to do. He took Boone and threw Boone at the Indian. Knocked the Indian off his feet, picked up Boone, and went and got into the fort. Now, Boone was a little worse for wear after that, but he did survive. And that's how Simon Kenton saved the life of Daniel Boone. That is not a story. That is a historical fact. Everything that's written in the Frontiersman is a historical fact. Now, the reason why Simon Kenton is so important to us is he lived right here in this area. In fact, he died in Bellefontaine, Ohio. That's where he lived. And he opened up this entire area. Now, one of the reasons why he's not well known is because Boone kind of turned to politics. George Rogers Clark, I mean, that was about politics and opening up the Northwest Territory and that kind of thing that he did. A lot of politics involved. So they got a lot more attention. Simon Kenton did not want attention. You know why? He was a fleeing felon. Well, at least he thought he was. How the story goes was, and I want to tell you where he was born at. He was, where is it? Oh, he was born in Culpeper County, Virginia on April 3rd, 1755. And he fell head over heels for this girl. And he's only 16 years old, but he fell head over heels for this girl to the point where when this other guy stole her from him, at least that's his story, he got into a fight and he thought he killed this man. So he fled. And when he fled to, parts unknown. First, I think he went up to Michigan, ended up coming into Ohio. But he ran into a smith, a blacksmith, whose last name was Butler. And he convinced that Butler that he was a long-lost relative that had come over, and that he was Irish. I don't know how he pulled all that off, but he did. So the butler, or the blacksmith, hired him, changed his name to Simon Butler. And that's how he was known for many, many years, because he was afraid, he was scared he's going to get strung up for killing that guy. And the blacksmith liked his work so well that he paid him, and he also gave him his first flintlock. And it was a fine rifle. He would be proficient with that rifle to the point that the Shawnee called him Baldler, was the name that they called him. It means the man whose gun is never empty. Now, I have a percussion flintlock at my home. It's passed down to me from my father. It's a Mississippi rifle, which is a little bit later than the one that he would have, or the kind of gun he would have, but very similar. And let me tell you something. If you can load that thing on a dead run, you are something else. First of all, it's hard to carry at a dead run. It's heavy. But he could load the gun at a dead run and then turn around and shoot. That's why they called him Baldler, the man whose gun was never empty. He named his gun Jacob, which is interesting because it is Jacob that deceived his father and changed his name to Esau. And here he had changed his name to Simon. I don't know if he knew that when he did it, but he called his rifle Jacob. Well, he soon realized that there was a lot to be gained by exploring this whole area where we're sitting, and even into Kentucky. There are some places in Kentucky that he scouted out. And they had a thing called where they take a hatchet and they mark trees, and that's how you claimed land. Now, of course, you're claiming land that the Shawnee Indians are claiming at the same time. So you can just imagine that Simon wasn't a friend of the Shawnee. The Shawnee had put him, let's put it this way, Daniel Boone, Simon Kenton. That's who they wanted. And here's the ironic thing. Later on, Simon finds out that the guy he thought he killed didn't die. And they accused him of murdering Simon because Simon disappeared. Ironic. So he went back to changing his name to Simon Kenton, since he wasn't a murderer and he wasn't on the lam and he wasn't a felon, So he just he went by his real name at that point. So he set off for the wilderness, and he started exploring here in Ohio, and he's helping settlers. He helped settlers. He saved a lot of lives as far as the settlers go, and against Indians and that kind of thing. He was captured a couple times, but at one point when the Shawnee captured him, they pronounced the death sentence on him, and when they did that, they would paint him black. Now, I'm not saying everything he did to the Indians was great. He stole some of their horses or ponies. I don't know what that was about. And when you're reading this book, The Frontiersman, you're just as enamored with Tecumseh as you are Simon Butler. I mean, both of them are fascinating individuals. But the reason I'm bringing up Simon, you'll understand why I'm bringing up Simon Kenton. But anyway, when he was captured by the Shawnee, they painted him black. And we're talking right here in this area. He ran a gauntlet. In fact, it's right down the road. And it runs from Old Town to the Tecumseh Motel. About a half-mile run. That's how long that thing was. So they painted him black, and he had to run not just one, but he had to run like 9 of these things over his lifetime. But I think he had 6 or 7 to run before he had already run some different ones. But he had 6 or 7 to run before they executed him. In other words, when they have such a name, I mean, it would be like, you know, it would be like ISIS capturing Obama. You know, they're gonna drag it out. Anyway, you understand what I'm saying. It was a big name target. Is what it was. So what they did was they took him, painted him black. They had him run the gauntlet in every village, and they were trying to get him up near Wapakoneta. And all these are, you understand, all these are Indian names. Even Kentucky, it comes from Kentucky, where they had the cane. They look for these cane along the river. I'm not sure exactly what it is, but he found those things anyway. But we have all these Indian names for these places, and they took him up to Wapakoneta because they wanted to centralize where all of the Shawnee would be present for his execution. But in each village, he had to run one of these gauntlets. And he could have lost his life in any of the gauntlets. They would line up 2 abreast or 2 sides, you know, and a half-mile long. They would have clubs, rocks, briars, anything. I mean, the women, the children. I mean, he said the squaws were the worst, man. I mean, they really tried to hurt him. And they'd all be lined up, and he'd have to just make a mad dash for it, just as fast as he could run. And one after the other. One time he was able to literally jump the line, he was a big man, jumped the line and took off like a rabbit. And they couldn't catch him. Even these Indians couldn't catch him. He was that fast. But who does he run into? He runs into Blue Jacket. And Blue Jacket hit him with a tomahawk that put a quarter-size hole in his skull. They nursed him back to health because they weren't ready to kill him yet. But you know, that's the way things are. Eventually, trouble comes our way. And it never comes, you know, where just here today, gone tomorrow. It usually stays a while. And I've told you that, you know, every Christian goes through trouble. But it seems like sometimes it's a gauntlet. And there's some things that I learned from reading about him going through that gauntlet. And things that he knew that if he did, he would die. And that's the things I want to talk to you about. Then I want to read you something actually from the book, just a little bit. But the one thing you do when you're running a gauntlet is you don't stop. You run. And the Bible talks about running a race. And we talked about run the race with patience. But God does want you to run. And you know, it's awful hard for trouble. Sometimes if you're running, it's awful hard for trouble to catch up with you. And it's awful hard to inflict as much pain upon you if you just stay in the race and keep running. If he tripped, he got up. If they knocked him down, he got up. Because staying down, they would just punish him over and over and over again. Make it harder to get through the gauntlet, wouldn't it? And for a Christian, it's the same way in this life. Sometimes you just have to get up, keep running, keep going. Don't stop. That's the worst thing you can do. Yet it seems like today, Christian runs into the first thing that happens, the first time somebody hits them, or the first time somebody slaps them or gives them a hard time or persecutes them or anything in the way, they quit. They quit. I mean, this man, when he's running these gauntlets, he's not a safe man. He doesn't have God in his life, but he does have some spirit about him. He does have some tenacity. And it's lacking. It's lacking in Christians because it's lacking in our nation. And we do need some tenacity. We read that verse over there in 2 Samuel. It says, "For by thee I have run through a troop. By my God I have leaped over a wall." That's exactly what he did. He ran through a troop, and then he leaped over a wall of people to escape. That's what made me think of him. And, if he had just run one, I'd say, well, he's a lucky man. But he ran 9 of these. Survived them all. You know how old he lived? He lived to be 80 with a quarter-size hole in his skull. He lived to be 80 years old. The other thing not to do is, or the thing to do is endure the blows while you're in the gauntlet. It's never fun having trouble. It's never fun going through a trial. It's never fun being in pain. But the only thing you can do as a Christian is endure it. And keep going. Endure it and keep going. 2 Thessalonians 1:4 says, "So that we ourselves glory in you in the churches of God for your patience and faith in all your persecutions and tribulations that ye endure." And God just wants you to endure some things. He wants you to keep going. And when you get hit, you get back up. When you get hit, you keep going. And it's going to happen. It's going to happen. You may not have experienced it yet, but and many of you have, but if you haven't, you will. You're going to experience trouble. 1 Corinthians 9:24 says, "Know ye not that they which run in a race run all, but one receiveth the prize? So run that ye may obtain." God says just keep running. And there's something else, I don't know if I've just added this one, but I think it makes sense, found a few scriptures on it, but make a lot of noise. He'd start off and he'd start screaming and yelling. It kind of startled them. In fact, before they even said go, he'd take off. He didn't wait for it. He wasn't going to play by their rules. But just that yelling and screaming scared the kids. They never even got to hit him. And some of the squalls were taken back because they didn't know what he's going to do. But just screaming all the way. And make a little noise, Christian. Make a little noise. Let them know who you believe in. Let them know the gospel. Make a little noise. It distracts your enemies. It kind of throws them off guard. Maybe you won't get it as big a beating. I don't know. But he did make some noise. Isaiah 9:5 says, "For every battle of the warrior is with confused noise and garments rolled in blood." Battle's confusing. One of the reasons they do that is to throw the enemies off guard. I remember I saw a documentary about a ghost army that the United States set up to fool the Germans. And they would take all these balloon type things, blow them up. It looked like tanks and jeeps and trucks. And at nighttime, they'd take 1 or 2 real jeeps or one tank, and they just ride it back and forth, to make the noise. And the Germans would believed that there was movement going on over here, that they were staging an offensive, when actually it was over here. So make a little noise. Throw them off guard. Psalm 98:4 says, "Make a joyful noise unto the Lord, and all the earth make a loud noise, and rejoice and sing praise." When Paul and Silas found themselves in the stocks in a dungeon, the Bible says they started singing. They started singing. Started singing hymns. And that'll throw your enemy off. Not Harlan Popoff, but the other guy that we just, from Romania. What's his name? We just saw a movie about him not too long ago. Wurmbrand. Richard Wurmbrand. Thank you. Richard Wurmbrand overwhelmed his enemies by his Christian spirit to where he converted one of the top KGB agents that interrogated him. You know how he did that? He just made a little noise. But it was a noise, a joyful noise, and they couldn't understand that he had some joy in his life. So you can make some noise. Keep your head down. Bible says that pride goeth before destruction and a haughty spirit before a fall. Watch out about pride. If he'd put his head up, he'd have got it knocked off. Keep your head down. Stay humble. You know, don't think that you're the living end, because you're not. Anticipate a long gauntlet, not a short one. I guess the mistake he would have made to think it would have been, oh, you know, from here to the door. No, it was a half-mile long. And that required that not only did he have to pace himself in his running, but he had to tell himself that he was, and make up his mind that he was going to make it to the end. I believe he had to tell himself that each time. Sometimes I have to tell myself that I'm going to endure this. I'm going to get to the end of this. And by God's grace, and that's what I always pray, by God's grace, I'm going to make it to the end. 2 Timothy 4:7, Paul said this, I have fought a good fight, I have finished my course, I have kept the faith. If you're going to finish the course, sometimes you're going to have to make up your mind you're going to do it. And it's going to take some real faith. And everybody tends to want to rely on feeling. I wouldn't do that if I was you. Feelings run out. Especially when it comes to sickness, when it comes to pain, your feelings won't carry you. Only your faith will. That's why they're not related. A lot of folks in America think faith is a feeling, and it's not. Faith is what you believe. I don't care what you think, or I don't care how you feel. I don't care what you think about the situation. What do you believe? Then let that carry you through the gauntlet, and that alone. Because you're not going to feel good about it. It's like Monday morning. Who feels like going to work? Anybody? You do? Oh, I'm going to say you must have a great job. You're just like, oh, no. I know some people dread it so bad they have problems on Sunday, thinking about Monday. I used to think that way. It worried me to death. And I'm like, I said, I got enough to worry about without worrying about work on Monday. But you know, it's not something you feel like, but what you believe is, look, I have to do this. I'm glad some brother here doesn't have to worry about that anymore. We all envy you, sir. The last point is, don't let the gauntlets of life affect your joy in the Lord. And you're going to have trouble. And the joy is the fact that you are saved, and that your suffering will come to an end one day. Whatever suffering that is, it will come to an end. In fact, if the Lord blows the trumpet and the rapture takes place, your troubles are over immediately. At that very moment, you have no more troubles because you've left them all behind. And you have to keep that in your mind. You have to keep it in mind that you're going to a place that's eternal, to worship a God that's eternal, in a mansion that's eternal, in a body that's eternal. And realize and weigh it against the things that are now. 2 Corinthians 4:17 says, for our light affliction, which is but for a moment, worketh for us a far more exceeding and eternal weight of glory. He says light affliction, and for a moment, because that's what it is compared to eternity. You have to weigh that. Listen, you have to be thinking about this kind of stuff when you're going through a gauntlet. When you're going through the trials of life, you have to think of this kind of stuff because it's the only thing that will get you through it. When you compare it to eternity. Now, if all you got is the nasty now and now, I feel sorry for you. You don't have much. And there's always somebody willing to take away what little you have. But you can't take away what I got. You can't take my salvation away and the promises of God. I have them. Now, you can take anything else away, but that's all junk anyway. But now, here's the thing I wanted to read you. Like I said, I'm not much great at illustrations, but I hope I did well with it. But I want to read you something about Simon Kenton. And I was reading the book and came upon this, and it was pleasantly surprising and wonderful. It says, Kenton frequently went to church, though in the Kentucky days it was more often as a lookout or sharpshooter, guarding the congregation against Indians, than as a devout participant in the ceremonies. Since coming to Ohio, however, it had become a regular practice of his to attend the camp meetings with Elizabeth, that was his wife, when the autumn season rolled around. In October 1808, when meetings began under Reverend Bennett Maxey, he attended, along with other members of the family. For several days, they camped at Voss's campgrounds on Buck Creek, a few miles above Springfield, listening to the sermons and watching as friends and neighbors were saved. Now, the guy who wrote this book, as far as I don't know if he was a professing Christian, but everything he wrote was based on fact. He had a document, a letter, and this is what he wrote. One day, Simon kept to himself, a troubled expression on his face, until finally he approached the Reverend Maxey. Mr. Maxey, he said slowly, I'd take it kindly if you walk out into the woods a bit with me. The preacher readily assented, and the two men strolled together through the woods until the sound of the camp meeting was lost behind them. Finally, Kenton stopped and faced the minister. Mr. Maxey, I am going to communicate some things to you which I want you to promise to me you will never divulge. This is what the preacher says. If it will not affect any but ourselves, Maxey replied immediately, or if it will not affect any but ourselves, Maxey replied immediately, then I promise to keep it forever. With the preacher thus pledged to secrecy, the frontiersman sat on a log and broke into a long and detailed confession of the things he had done with his life, of the wrongs he had committed. At Maxey's direction, both of them fell to their knees and prayed aloud to God for mercy and salvation as Maxey beseeched Jesus, the Almighty Savior, to help this man. As he did so, a great transformation came over the frontiersman. He came to his feet with a joyous cry that rang through the woods. Then he ran, leaving Preacher Maxey behind, leaping over logs and bushes and bellowing with a fierce exultation. He burst from the woods into the campgrounds, and when the startled crowd had gathered around him, told them all in a roaring voice of his being saved. He was joining the camp of God at last. Soon the Reverend Maxey made his way to the inner ring of people encircling the frontiersman, and during a pause in Simon's enthusiastic outpouring said, I thought we were to keep the matter a secret. Kenton shook his head violently. Oh, it's too glorious for that. His voice rang out above the murmur of the crowd. If I had all the world here, I would tell of the mercy and goodness of God. Now, after reading all that and all that he had went through, and not everything good in his life, but all that he had went through, and then to read of him being saved, thrilled me to no end. The man that had survived the gauntlet ended up getting saved at a camp meeting when the preaching was, even early on when they were still establishing themselves in this area, they had those camp meetings, and Simon Kenton got saved. I think that's another reason why maybe he didn't become so popular, because he was a saved man. What's interesting is that after that, Simon Kenton didn't do too much after that. He did work for George Rogers Clark and doing some scouting, but kind of calmed down and settled at home. He had 9 children, and he lived to be 80 years old. A saved man. I look forward to hearing more stories one of these days from Simon Kenton when I get to glory. But if that man can survive what he survived, and he wasn't even saved at the time those happened, you and I can endure some things. We just have to have a little tenacity, a little character, and a little trust in the Lord that he'll get us through. All right, let's all stand.